This is The Changed Physician, episode 160. Welcome back to The Changed Physician. I am Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and we're here to bring you the first episode of 2022, which, somehow with Changed Physician, you have to talk about goals or change. So we just had a little conversation off the air, talking about the focus of this first conversation. And I was just thinking, personal, professional, and podcast goals, good old P.P.P. No, not the P.P.P. loan from the federal government. And are you down with P.P.P.? Well, you know me. I don't know which title we're going to go with once we're done with editing this, but any comments off there? It looks like you're ready to say something, Kevin.
No, this because all kind of, we were talking about the new year, and it's always interesting because the new year was a perfect transition into kind of reflection and rumination and kind of thinking where we are. You could do this any day of the year, really, but these major events are actually associated with more change, actually, and being able to latch onto them. So I was asking you about if you had any plans or how you've ever kind of done intentional growth. And obviously when I was asking, because I was thinking about, I often will reflect back. This is the day that I kind of review things. Pretty historically, it may not be on January 1st, but it's usually within the first week or two of the date. Mm-hmm. And you had said the personal, professional, and podcast goals, which is P.P.P. And I love that. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to kind of go through this and just talk about, well, what are our personal, professional, and maybe possibly podcast goals, and then potentially how do we structure these things? Because there's go look up goal setting or whatever on the internet. There's a 60 million hits. I mean, it's obviously something of interest in people, and the more that's written about it kind of tells you that nobody's got it right. There's some really detailed ones. There's some other ones. Have you, I have my own feelings on this because I spent a lot of time doing this stuff, but I'm kind of curious. Have you ever looked at goal setting, or what are your experiences been around that?
So it's funny. Yes, you see things fly by you all the time, like how to set goals and SMART goals. And, but I think the most important thing that I've realized, when it comes to changing, not because you have to and bad things happen, and that's like the hardest lessons learned, like intentional change to like improve upon your life, is that you have to find a time where you can slow down. And it's funny you said like around New Year's, and I find that the same, that first month, or usually the first couple of weeks, like you said, of January, when all the hoopla of all the, Christmas and the holidays and people are constantly busy, is finding that downtime right after that seems like a perfect timing for it. And so I feel like, you asked me what I think about goal setting or a framework for that. Is that what you're specifically asking?
I'll say, well, what are your experiences with goal setting? Have you actively set goals? If you have, how'd they go? What were your strengths? What were your weaknesses? That kind of thing.
So I'm a doer by nature. So I think it's easier, which can be also a weakness too, is that when you're used to doing things, you feel like you don't need anyone else to do it. If I want to go do that little 5K from a fitness standpoint, I just decide to do it. And then you figure out the things you need to do and break it into small parts and adapt it slowly. Don't ever go do the 5K right away. Like piece it out and increase the intensity, and you'll get there eventually. Kind of like that couch to 5K kind of stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm talking about like as sort of a life strategy, not an individual strategy. But do you actually, because there's a difference between planning for a singular event.
Yes.
And then having the awareness that your life is sort of a journey, and you can either float through it or you can sort of paddle through it, And I would say I didn't really think about this other than resolutions, which are kind of dumb, until 2008-ish, when I was listening to Tony Robbins CDs. And that was the first time I really had heard about intentional change. Like, rather than being a kind of a participant, that you can actually sort of drive where your life is going. And that started when I started actually writing things down and actually charting this stuff. And so I'm just kind of, have you, when were you introduced to that? And then what have your experiences been around that, the successes or for failure? And I have a ton of examples as well. So I'm
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think most of my life has been sporadic, and most of my life has been dictated by others' expectations of what my goals should be. So I would say that in our medical training, that's kind of our whole path. This is the next step. This is the next step. That's what you got to do. And you really don't think about it. And you said like in 2008, like pretty much when you're like private practice, seems like that age. Same for me. I don't think most of my personal development came until probably 2010-ish. And Tony Robbins is one of them. I had all the CDs I listened to in my car. I actually, before then, just sporadically, I'm trying to think of the tapes. He's so popular and I'm blanking on his name right now. Anyway, I'll come back to it if I remember. But I would say I didn't really have a practice, like a regular practice for establishing goals. I think I just kind of got into this world of personal development. Maybe sometimes I think about kind of that perfectionist attitude, which wasn't always a healthy thing. It was kind of like, I need to be better. I need to be better. I need to work on this. I need to work on that. But that wasn't really an intentional guide. It was more like I was trying to learn about myself, but not really trying to create who I want to be versus what I've become because of everyone else around me that's kind of molded me. But I think the last 2 or 3 years has been kind of my January downtime where I have been doing a little bit journaling, not as consistently, but I do know the value of putting it down, the act of actually writing it for your own mind, or having something on, a mirror or a fridge. But I think that I've been really bad about.
I think that's the point, right? I think that's important to. I think most of us are really bad at it,
right?
And this way, it's this big old industry, and there's all these books, and yet overall, I would say that most people, I think most people are either not really aware of it, and then implementation becomes extremely difficult to do. But you also see like the examples of the people who are, examples of people providing the goal setting stuff. Quite a few of them have been, whatever we call successful, right? That they do it. So I'm always kind of, so I also struggle with this. I would say I've been doing this since 2008. And usually, the people have the short term and like the month or the year, and then there's a 5-year and the 10-year in your life goals. And then you have different categories like finances and relationships and personal health kind of a thing. And I can't remember how long I'd been doing it, maybe 3 or 4 years. And it was always interesting to me. I'd had the 3 categories, usually financial, health, and maybe relationships. And every year when I reviewed it, only one of them was getting done. And it was always the financial one. And it was also the easiest one. Easiest meaning is you kind of set the goal out, and then with, auto deduction, all the stuff, you can just set it up and forget it, the Ron Popeil method on it. So it's really hard. Mm-hmm. And I was hoping that you would have the magic bullet that I've been craving this whole time. But I think it's, I kind of try to figure, well, why is it the financial one? And so other people may be different than me. Maybe they find that the relationship one's really easy, and then the financial one is really, really hard. So I've been trying to figure out, like, what is it that makes goal setting as a framework difficult for people? What are the challenges there?
Yeah, well, you cannot, you talk about awareness and intentionality. You cannot be in denial. That sometimes the pain associated with being honest with yourself about the things you've ignored, whether it's your body, your like physical health, things you take on, not being able to, not saying no to things that really aren't in alignment with you. If you don't have eyes wide open of where your problems are, which I will give you an example. If you look at those three things you just said, health, wealth, and relationships, I wouldn't say any of them are terrible, but I would say I definitely feel like my biggest challenges are relationships. And then financial, I feel like I'm just starting to get conceptually starting to like move it in the right direction. It doesn't matter how much you make, it's a lot of the choices that you make within that amount you make. But I feel like this, things will be better, and I'm definitely in the right direction. And my health, pandemic and kind of slacking off this year. I mean, I would say that that's always been a path of least resistance for me. Is I've created habits and choices and patterns since I was a child. So for me, fitness and health is comes more naturally to me. It takes less energy. Although right now, when you get out of doing it after a while, you got to get yourself back through that initial inertia resistance. But I would say definitely my relationships is where 2022 is probably my biggest focus. So when you're honest with yourself of where you are definitely the farthest away from where you want to be, I'm going to put more energy into that. It's kind of like when I work out and my left leg is not as strong as my right. I always start with my left leg and make that work hard first. So, I'm just going to try to turn things around instead of take the path of least resistance and do the things that are easier and more natural for me. I'll still do those things, but I know it doesn't take a lot of energy for me to do it. I just need to start doing it again. So for me, relationships and putting time and energy into those I love the most to build those relationships is going to be key for 2022. And the next thing would be continue to learn on a financial level and how to make better choices and make better decisions financially for a better future. And then the fitness stuff will just be in the background. So that's kind of how I see, those three sets of goals. But you cannot be in denial of where your weaknesses are.
It all takes a theme awareness, and you have to actually reset and kind of take a view from above and be honest with yourself of where things are. Mm-hmm. But I want to ask you about implementation in just a second here, because I think that's the other thing is there's the recognition. So we can almost say, well, what the first to do is a review. And that review has to have an honest assessment, right? So that you can actually say, well, where am I? And I do think those are probably the easier. If you only want to just hone in on three categories, is really the health, wealth, and relationship things. Those are like the most important things overall. And where do you stand on each one of those? And then, so when you're implementing, how would you do it? Because I'm going to kind of pull this back a little bit. And I mentioned earlier that the financial one was the easiest for me. And I think the financial one was the easiest because I wrote it down. So I would literally write it down, and I would sort of make a projection in my head of where I wanted things to be. Mm-hmm. And then honestly, it was the weirdest thing. Like, this is the only, people talk about this manifesting and blah, 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 all this other kind of garbage. But this was the only thing that literally, once I would sort of review it and plan, the weirdest thing is that the next year, I'm like, oh, look at what happened. Never happened for anything else, but that was the one. And I do think part of it is because you could set up those processes in advance, and then somehow subconsciously, I just did some stuff that was better than anticipated. But maybe those was not necessarily unconscious because I had actually thought about it. Like, so.
But, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. What are we going to say?
No, just thinking the automation part. You reminded me of a man who was very wealthy when I asked him what it is that took him to where he's at that point. He said it's a system. The system you put in place could be automated. The system that we try to put in place for relationships and for our fitness, automating them to do them you have to actually do it. A computer or an automated billing system or whatever transaction online, that's different with the financial part. You can put that in place. You do have to do the act of setting it up, but you still have to put in the energy to the relationships. The computer can't do it for you. And the same thing goes for your fitness. You can't just make someone do the fitness for you. You've got to actually activate your own body.
Well, and that's a super, super good point. And I love that. There's actually a book old book, kind of around the time of Think and Grow Rich, but it can't, the system for something success or something like that. And someone actually said that the secret to that book is actually in the title. And it was because this, like you said, it was a system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the reason the financial one was easier for me, is because there was a system, and the system basically was, you have a number, there's another future number, and then you kind of think, well, how do those numbers grow? And then you make assumptions for there. Like mine was like, there 10, 15 years ago, people talk about dollar cost averaging and taking out a piece of your paycheck or whatever. And I was like, this is dumb. I mean, this doesn't make any sense. If really you wanted in the market to grow, then you want as much in the market as early as you can. So we would front load all of our retirement accounts, like literally fund them all January through March or whatever, like whatever we can potentially throw in there without not being able to eat.
Yeah.
And that front loading works. And it ends up actually later on that there's some data on that it's not timing the market, but it's time in the market. So how much you can get in as early as you possibly can grow. That was an unconscious system. The systems themselves, though, require, like you were saying, action. So there's this habitual aspect to it. So if we think of financial health and relationships, and I have had historically done the financial one, and this is not like saying I'm some crazy, like some of the guests that we have, we're doing okay, but we're definitely not where some of our guests are in any way, shape, or form. But I would say the health one, remarkably, that one I struggled with a long time. And the difference with that one was just focusing on the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we've talked a little bit about those. You've had a healthy background. I grew up feeling I was always the fat kid because I was a fat little kid. And that's a whole different episode, like when you're a fat little kid and how that affects your image of yourself. So even when you're not fat, you feel like you're fat and all that stuff. But that one all came down as just making sure you're doing something all the time. So my system for that one was, okay, what are you going to be focusing on? And that was, 1 year was running and speed. I wanted to be able to run 1.5 miles in this time. And so that's all you focus on. You just make sure you're doing it every day. But once you have that going, that sort of overview of where you want to go, and then you're just saying, well, this is what the process that's involved with doing it every day, remarkably, that becomes habitual.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it's a habit, like you said, you can put it in the back burner, or not just in the back. You're still aware of it, but it doesn't take that front loading work anymore.
Yeah, it's on automatic.
So as we work through this, because I almost feel like this is an exercise here.
Yeah.
Re-summarize so far. What was you have to have time to reflect. With that reflection, you have to have an honest assessment of where you are. You have to have some idea of where you want to go. Mm-hmm. And then the system standpoint is kind of devising what are the actions that are going to be involved with taking you to that place.
Right. And in the background of all that, which is the biggest dilemma, I think, for humans, and I'll speak for myself, is that you have to know who you are to be able to answer those questions. And sometimes we become something maybe not by design of our own, but how life led us to that. So you kind of have to know, like you said, I mean, it's like, what do you want? I mean, that's important. But I think it's important to mention before all of that is that deep work, I feel like only in my 40s, I'm just starting to really do, is determining what do you want your life to look like? What's important to you, or what would you like to change about your life? And then you have to assess all those things you just said. Because sometimes our values are not in alignment with the life that we've kind of fallen into versus created. And to correct you from being a healthy person younger, I would say that I was a very fit person, but I wouldn't say that I feel like sometimes looking fit is not always the best barometer of your health or your wellness. And so I feel like I realized that I didn't have a lot of healthy relationships and didn't have, there was definitely aspects to my wellness that were not in alignment with what looked like I was fit. So it's a journey for all of us, I'll put it that way. But what was the last one you said? figuring out the things to achieve it. What was the last part of those things you just said?
I think it was like implementing the steps, like implementing something.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think everyone out there, there's so many different structures or ways of going about that, but it depends what it is. But I think you have to break it down into all of the parts and do those little achievable tiny steps, and also be self-compassionate and give yourself credit for doing that, so you get some positive reinforcement so you can keep doing it. I mean, you talked about fitness. I mean, you were deriving some kind of gratification with each effort you made, other than maybe feeling sore the first.
That's the funny thing about fitness, is it always feels good when you're done.
Yes.
Like almost, well, I shouldn't say almost always, 99% of the time it always feels, it's
energy, at least.
Yeah, it's getting started. Actually, I told my kids this. I go, really the secret about success is doing the things that you want to do when you don't want to do them.
Exactly.
Because everybody says they want to exercise, but when it's like now, nobody wants to exercise, right? So it's really, as long as you kind of know what you want to do, then just do it even when you don't want to do them. You should be good.
Yeah.
And it's a lot harder than it sounds.
But I mean, it can be a struggle for sure. I'm so excited to get back into it. I this is what I did for myself to help re-inspire myself is I found a piece of equipment that I really, really, really like, that can allow me to push myself, but not feel like, I'm gonna have like repetitive injuries of some sort. And I'm looking forward to that coming in January. And once it's here, like that's kind of like my stimulus to create like a plan to do a little bit every day and use that as my personal development time in my head.
So why are you hiding what this thing is?
Oh, well, it's not everyone knows what an adaptive motion trainer.
Oh, okay.
So it's a pre-core thing. It had a huge sale like in like the holidays. I'm like, oh boy, I'm like, okay, how many months of gym membership would that equate to over like 5 years? Okay, I can make it work. But I realized that I like having our fitness membership, but it's on freeze right now because we're just not feeling comfortable going out there. So I don't want to have to travel. If you think about maybe the 30 minutes you spend just traveling to and from the gym, unless that's, you need the gym to kind of inspire you. I don't need the gym to inspire me. I mean, it does add a little bit, but whole point is I'm excited about this because it'll save me trips to the gym and back. And I feel like I'm running in the air, Kevin. That's why I feel free, and like it just gets me very excited to have that kind of workout.
Right, so that's a plan.
Yes.
The question then becomes implementation, right? Because there's a lot, I'm going to buy the new Peloton, or I'm going to buy the new whatever. Really, it comes down to, though, is the implementation, which is, I think, where a lot of times this goals get lost. How do you implement?
So I always link it with something I like. So favorite music, put in my ears. Some kind of like, I've been wanting to listen to this webinar, or I need to do my CME, or so if I can do something that I don't need my hands or feet for, just need my eyes and ears for, then I plug it in, get in the sunroom. I see the nature of my backyard, birds chirping away, and just, garden growing. And I just feel like I'm in my little, haven. Everyone has their own little piece of heaven somewhere. So find a little piece of heaven, but I link it with something I know I need to do or I want to do. And then I do it at the same time. So, being on a machine doesn't sound really exciting to anybody, but if you're linking it with something else, you just know you need to get it done and you want to get it done, but you might as well get something else done that you need to do anyway. And you might be sitting on your rear end the whole time, so might as well move. But other people can do it in other ways. They really want to talk to their friend that's down the street, and they go for a walk, and they do a walk and talk instead of like talking on the phone and sitting down. There's so many ways you can, especially with fitness, you can just, link it with something else. And then what happens, that linkage, something you maybe do already that you want to do, that's because you start linking it with that, your brain's already wired to do that thing you like doing all the time. So the other thing starts to be associated with that. That's just from like a neuro standpoint.
Yeah.
Does that help?
That was like a Tiny Habits thing from BJ Fogg.
That too.
But no, because it's interesting. So the linking is the primary thing. So the motivator is, oh, I'm going to do this, whatever, but while I'm doing it, I get to do this thing.
It's less painful in your head.
Because that doesn't work for me.
Works for me.
Well, I know, and that's what I'm saying.
Interesting.
That's what I'm saying is this stuff is different for other people, and the linking thing for something that is fairly effortful for me. Like again, you know, the BJ Fogg thing is like, oh, floss one tooth if you hate flossing, and do your little happy dance or whatever when you do it. And the other advantage is once you floss one tooth, you're like, whatever, this is stupid. This is so easy. I should do the rest of my teeth. But what I for the fitness ones, like I bought a Precor treadmill years and years ago, and was a huge purchase at the time for me. And you know, this is a gym grade treadmill, and I was like, how do I justify this? And what I did with that one is I said, well, I'm gonna have to use it every day for 100 days. So then because it's interesting because you have this intrinsic thing that's motivating you, which is better. Like intrinsic motivation is much better. I know about intrinsic motivation, and yet I need this extrinsic stuff. So I literally was like, okay, I can't buy this thing and not use it. So every day for the next 100 days, I'm going to get on this treadmill and I have to go for at least a mile. And that worked. But
it's all your money to be wasted.
Well, yeah. And there was no linking anything pleasurable. I mean, I found something pleasurable, like, and when I was running a lot on that thing, this was like 10 years ago, I found it. The pleasurable stuff sort of just happened. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I wasn't doing it because I knew I had the link there. I was doing it because I had to, but then I found a way to make it enjoyable. So it's almost like a little flip of what you were doing.
Yeah. But and there's two other things too that can, I think, help as well, is that some people, they're just connectors, they're relationship people because they love to be around. They'll do the stuff they don't do on their own. They'll do it with other people. I mean, CrossFit's like a perfect example of that, or Orange Theory, or, you know, all these things that are out there that kind of bring people together and get people all like fired up. And there's that social anchor that can really help certain people. That can augment for me. I don't need that per se. I mean, I can't say it doesn't help me. I don't feel like for fitness, I need that as much. But the other thing is that some people that are taskers or to-doers, putting it on your calendar, just putting it on your calendar that you just have to go do it, regardless of how you're feeling, it has to be done. I think could be also a valuable thing, which I'll probably utilize a lot for my relationship cues, for me to be mindful and connect or reach out, like, you know, call 3 friends on this day, you know, Sunday, call 3 friends, or send a text or send an audio text or something to just stay connected from a relationship standpoint. So I think we gave just like 4 examples there. Right?
What were those 4 examples?
Linking it with another habit you already have. You kind of created this, like, I don't want to call it rationalization, but to make the purchase worth its while, you had to achieve this from a financial standpoint for it to make sense.
It's like an external driver. Yeah.
Right. But then you started getting internal benefits from it that
later on. And that's, yeah.
And then putting it on the calendar without thought. Don't even
that's
step into it.
The break the chain thing. I think some folks call that the Seinfeld technique, where they,
I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's the Seinfeld tech. Don't break the chain, right? If you do something every day, you check the calendar, and the whole entire thing is to not break the chain. So you make sure that there's an X every day.
Yeah. And then do it with others.
But you know, the interesting thing, the little thing, I'm frustrated is for all of it. Well, because ultimately, like, they talk about the success system, and we're saying that we need a system for goals, and yet none of the systems actually, there's no universal system, and that, to me, is frustrating. I like structuring things in such a way that once you've reduced it to like the key components, then you can implement those key components. And I feel for something like this, I still haven't been able to reduce it to its key variables.
So you don't agree with the SMART system?
I think the SMART system, so SMART for people who aren't like SMART goals, specific, measurable, accountable. What's the R?
Achievable, relevant, and timely.
Achievable, relevant, and timely. And that's a system.
Yeah.
I think though, again, having written down specific, measurable, all that stuff, at some point they break down in some situations. So I haven't been, I don't know. I want something that works consistently, and probably also my expectations are way too high.
Yeah.
Like when you look at sort of goal setting and activities, if you're batting 50%, you're probably doing really, really well. And my brain sees it, well, instead of saying, well, you achieve 50% of your overall goals, that's actually awesome. My brain says, well, you only did 50%. What a failure you are, and that's a perception thing that I know is not.
That's called progress. Not perfection.
Yeah. And it's a total, it's the way people can assess progress by either seeing how far they've gone, or you can assess progress by how far you failed, you fell short. One of them is going to make you happy, and one of them is going to make you upset. And I know my brain tends to look at where I didn't go and say, well, you're 99, you went 99 miles, but you didn't make it the last mile, you big dork.
So that's the thing, is like, do you perceive that lack thereof as a challenge, or as a sense of like your state of how you feel about yourself or your self-esteem?
So yes. Yeah. This goes back to that fixed versus growth mindset thing. This is like a summary episode of all the stuff we talk about on the change mindset, change physician. And it absolutely, because I know my mindset was, or set at a very early age, is a fixed mindset. And I'm well aware of what a growth mindset is. And I continue to try to implement it. But that awareness actually recognizes that this is the fixed part. This is the fixed part. This is your fixed part. So yeah, I mean, I see it as a personal failure, but then you have to remind yourself, well, no, you should be pursuing this stuff. Yeah, you're growing, you're getting better all the time, but it's like some little bird chirping on your shoulder that you're like, oh, come on, dude.
Yeah.
Why don't you just see it from the first place?
Yeah. Well, I've been told on many occasions, and I finally admit that I am kind of an eternal optimist at times. Not in everything, but I would say I'm generally like that. But I do find it interesting how that where our state is at that moment, if we're perceiving it as the challenge or we're less than. So I think that's a part of all of us. None of us go without in our life without some self-doubt, or that's normal, but we don't want, it's like we don't want it to be the driving force, obviously, if it's negative. Otherwise we stagnate and we don't move forward.
Well, you don't try, right?
Right.
If everything's an experiment and you're just trying to try it out, then you're willing to do it. But if everything is a measure of who you are, and if you're starting something new, it's hard and you're probably not going to do well, but that's a measure, a reflection of your internal state of, you're less likely to do things. Exactly. And this is the thing, I can spout that off and I know that, but because of whatever early formative whatevers, it still surfaces again.
Oh yeah.
And it's so even around this goal setting thing, it becomes, well, what has been working? And then over time is this, well, why does this work? So, I said, well, if I wrote and measured things, that seems to work better. If I did things that I can implement out of habit, that seems to work better. And so now, like, because we were talking about health, wealth, and relationships, like, well, okay, what can I do for the relationships then? Because this last year I actually had reminders set up. I was like, Fridays I was supposed to connect with people, and I didn't do a good job. I didn't do a horrible job. I actually connected with an old friend that I haven't talked to for years. I'm really glad I did that. But I'm not where I wanted to be, and I think it's because my system. So what is it? How am I going to implement this in such a way to increase the system when it comes to relationships? And again, the only way that this comes from anything, folks, is you have to actually be taking that time to reflect on what is working and what hasn't worked. And for me, the stuff that is working is writing things down and using some sort of external driver. And this is the frustrating thing, because you read all this personal development stuff, intrinsic motivation and da 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 da, and when it just doesn't work really well for me. So then you're like, well, maybe I'm just not one of those people. I have to go the other way and use what the non-super successful people do, which is kind of like do some sort of extrinsic thing, like every month you have to do this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a combination of those things is good for anybody. Obviously we all have different strengths to pull from, but you made me think a few minutes ago about, I wanted to bring up that framework on success, that philosopher Tom Morris, because I think it drives home some of the innate things or the invisible aspects to us as humans that may be the reason why the SMART goals are not sufficient, at least in my early opinion of this, coming across it. But there's 7 different things on this framework on success by Tom Morris: a clear conception of what we want, a vivid vision, a goal clearly imagined, which sounds like the specific and measurable stuff, a strong confidence that we can attain the goal, focused concentration on what it takes to reach our goal, a stubborn consistency in pursuing our vision, which I don't seem really timely, maybe that fits in there from the SMART goals, but an emotional commitment to the importance of what we're doing, the why. I think all of that's important, but the emotion behind that, a good character to guide us and keep us on our proper course, so in alignment with your values too, a capacity to enjoy the process along the way, so embracing the challenge, embracing the struggle. There's a lot of different phrases out there, but there's a lot of reasons why I think we drop off of these. I mean, we're starting January 1st, the gyms are going to be like jam-packed people, and it's not going to stick for a lot of them. So there's some of the things we talked about earlier might help it stick better, like the social anchors, or like Kevin said, just the extrinsic things that you can lay out for yourself. But what do you think about some of these, the confidence, concentration, consistency? I don't think that they're addressed in the SMART goals.
You don't think they're addressed in the SMART goals?
No, I think there's a little bit more. I think it's giving a little bit more nuance to why it's a challenge for some of these goals to be met. Like, if you're not concentrating on it, you're not consistent. Well,
it provides some idea of setting the framework anyway, for sure, which I guess is why they call it the framework of success, right? So conception is a big part. It's like, what are you interested in? That first one, conception, and they say a clear vision. And if you aren't really clear what you want, it makes it really, really difficult to get it.
Yeah, you won't stick with it.
Well, you won't stick with it, and you don't really know what you're doing with it. I also think that's a lot harder than people make it out to be. Like, what it is that you want. What do you want?
Yeah.
But I do think it's really, really critical, right? Because then being able to identify, well, this is what I want. This is what I want financially. This is what I want out of a relationship. This is what I want from a health standpoint. Well, if you can clearly identify that, and that's the specificity part of the SMART goal part, is being able to identify really, really specifically what you want to be able to do. So, health ways, I only want to weigh, I want to drop 100 pounds. Well, what specifically about that? Do you want to be able to run faster? Do you want to be able to do more push-ups? Do you want to be able to lift X amount of weight? Do you want to be able to hike X mountain? That conception really makes it real. And that leads right into the second one of the confidence part. That confidence piece is super, super critical, because if you don't believe you can do something, I'm not going to say you're not, you're significantly less likely to try, and you're significantly less likely to put the effort into doing it.
Yeah.
So I kind of like the other ones, because the concentration is really the persistence standpoint. I think that's more, you can also call that focus, maybe. Mm-hmm. Consistency is just doing it over time. The character one, I think, is a kind of a fluffy one, a little bit in there. that you have to have good character or whatever.
Yeah, but number 7, I think, is an important one. That's not really
Yes.
mentioned in SMART goals.
Well, because I don't have this problem per se, but I'm sure there's people out there, because you hear about them, that are so focused on goals and achievement that they forget why they're doing them, and they're not enjoying it along the way.
Yeah.
We've had some people like the FIRE movement, the financial independent retire early. And I think this is something that can easily get in the way of that, where people are so focused on this distant retirement thing, or not even that distant, trying to make this financially independent goal happen, not within 50 years or 20 years or 30 years, but 10 years or whatever, that they sacrifice everything in the here and now.
Right.
And I think that's, if your goals are causing you to not be happy in the now, that is not a good goal. And that's very different, because people, well, it's a hard goal and I'm struggling and it's difficult. No, if you're doing something that's hard, struggling, and difficult, but you're happy to do it because of the end result, that is not the same as difficult, hard, doing it. I'm resentful of the fact I'm doing it, but I'm doing it because of a future event. That, I think, is completely detrimental. And it just kind of set in my mind, because Arnold Schwarzenegger is awesome. And that dude is so good at setting goals. Like, have you ever watched the stuff he does? Like, he visualizes and then he focuses and he's like, I'm going to be the #1 bodybuilder in the world. And he did it. And I'm going to be the #1 actor in the world. And then he did it. I'm going to be the governor of California. Everybody laughs at him, and he did it. I mean, but when you talk about him, when he sets his goals, or when he talks about setting his goals, it's so funny, because he's like, I find joy every day I'm doing it. I'm finding joy because it's taking me to where I want to go. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is like the capacity and enjoyment is just the fact that we tend to delay or defer so much for this future. That's a whole nother, I have a whole lot more to talk about that, because I just had an episode, or had something happen in my family about this, but we defer everything to this future projection. But if you're not enjoying the process to getting there, you're actually hurting yourself. So I do think that capacity to enjoy is important. And I do think it's a good way to, if you're resentful of your journey right now, then you probably have the wrong goals, or you're probably implementing in a way that is not healthy for you.
Which is a perfect segue, because we've kind of pretty much talked about personal, the first P of the P.P.P for this part 1. And we have the professional and podcast goals, but I think it's a perfect segue into, there are many physicians who have gone through their training, and it may have been hard to feel the joy and enjoy the process along the way. If you didn't have a deep passion for learning at least what it takes to become a physician, or some other cause or goal that you had in mind, I think that's a whole episode right there on the process of becoming a physician. You might be sacrificing a lot of your here and now for the future. So you've got to have something underpinning you to this whole process. Otherwise, you might be a bitter, jaded physician when you get on the other side of it. But any final thoughts on that before we do part 2?
Many thoughts, because I think that the other part is, or you can just be completely unaware as you're going through that journey too. And that may provide a defense, because if you don't have any expectations, you may actually not get as jaded, because you have no idea what's going on.
Yes.
So,
yeah. Well, why don't you take us out? Because I think we're going to do a part 2 to this.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you all, folks, for our little jam session, really, more than anything, on goals and our individual experiences with them and the challenges around it. Because if anybody tells you it's super easy, they're probably, I don't know,
not human.
Either not human, they're probably a robot. And we'll delve into a little bit more. If you have any guides here, if you have that magic bullet for goal setting, please send it to me, because I definitely want it. And, and we can kind of go from there. But until next time, guys, stay well, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.